Chapter 22. What happened to Candide and Martin in France. Candide stopped in Bordeaux only long enough to sell a few Eldorado pebbles and provide himself with a good carriage, a two-seated one, for he could no longer do without his philosopher Martin. To his sorrow, however, he had to part with his sheep. He gave it to the Bordeaux Academy of Science, whose annual prize was awarded that year to the author of the best essay on the subject of why this sheep's wool was red. The winner was a scholar from the north who demonstrated by a plus b minus c divided by z that the sheep had to be red and would die of sheep pox. However, all the travelers Candide met at the inns along the road said to him, "We're going to Paris." This general eagerness finally gave him a desire to see the French capital. It would not take him very far off the road to Venice. He entered the city through the suburb of Saint-Marceau, and thought he must be in the ugliest village in Westphalia. Candide had scarcely put up at an inn when he was attacked by a slight illness caused by fatigue, since he wore an enormous diamond on his finger, and since a prodigiously heavy strong-box had been noticed among his baggage, he was immediately surrounded by two doctors he had not sent for, several intimate friends who would not leave him, and two pious and charitable ladies who kept him supplied with hot broth. "I remember being ill myself during my first stay in Paris," said Martin. "I was very poor, so I had no friends, altruistic ladies or doctors. I recovered." With the aid of medicines and bloodlettings, Candide's illness became serious. A regular visitor of the neighborhood came to him and gently asked him for a note payable to the bearer in the next world. Candide flatly refused. The pious ladies assured him it was the latest fashion. He replied that he was not a fashionable man. Martin wanted to throw the visitor out the window. The clergyman swore that Candide would not be buried. Martin swore that he would bury the clergyman if he continued to bother them. The quarrel became heated. Martin took him by the shoulders and roughly shoved him out of the room. This caused a great commotion, and a police report was made of the incident. Candide recovered. During his convalescence, a number of distinguished people came to have supper with him. They gambled for high stakes. Candide was amazed that he never had any aces in his hand, but Martin was not surprised. Among those who showed him around the city was a little abbé from Perigord, one of those assiduous, constantly alert and obliging, shameless, fawning, and accommodating people who lie in wait for passing strangers, tell them all the scandalous gossip of the city, and offer them pleasures at any price. He first took Candide and Martin to the theatre, where a new tragedy was being presented. Candide was seated near several wits. This did not prevent him from weeping during perfectly performed scenes. During the intermission, one of the quibblers beside him said to him, "You're wrong to weep. That actress is very bad. The actor playing with her is worse still, and the play is even worse than the cast. The author doesn't know one word of Arabic, yet the scene is in Arabia. Furthermore, he's a man who doesn't believe in innate ideas. Tomorrow I'll bring you 20 pamphlets written against him." "How many plays have been written in France, Candide?" asked the abbé. 5,000 or 6,000. "That's a lot," said Candide. "How many of them are good?" 15 or 16, replied the abbé. "That's a lot," said Martin. Candide was greatly pleased by an actress who played the part of Queen Elizabeth in a rather dull tragedy that is sometimes performed. "The actress is very attractive," he said to Martin. "She bears a slight resemblance to Lady Cunegonde. I'd like to pay my respects to her." The abbé offered to take him to her house. Candide, brought up in Germany, asked what the proper etiquette was, and how queens of England were treated in France. "That depends," replied the abbé. "In the provinces they're taken to an inn. In Paris they're respected when they're beautiful and thrown into the garbage dump when they're dead." "Queens in the garbage dump?" exclaimed Candide. "Yes, it's true," said Martin. "The abbé is right. I was in Paris when Mademoiselle Monime passed from this life to the next, to use a common expression. She was refused what these people call the honors of burial. In other words, the honor of rotting with all the beggars in the neighborhood in some sordid cemetery. She was buried all by herself in a corner of the Rue de Bourgogne, which must have caused her great sorrow because she had a noble mind. That was very impolite, said Candide. What can you expect? Asked Martin. That's how these people are. Imagine every possible contradiction and inconsistency, and you will find them all in the government, law courts, churches, and entertainment of this odd nation. Is it true that people in Paris are always laughing? Asked Candide. Yes, said the Abbé, but they're burning with rage at the same time. They complain about everything with gales of laughter, and they even laugh while they commit the most abominable crimes. Who's that fat pig? Said Candide, who was talking so vehemently against the play that made me weep so much, and against the actors who gave me so much pleasure. He's a spiteful man, replied the Abbé, who earns his living by attacking all plays and all books. He hates anyone who succeeds, just as eunuchs hate anyone who makes love. He's one of those snakes of literature who feed on filth and venom. He's a hack. What do you mean by a hack? Asked Candide. A man who writes for cheap rags. This conversation took place on the staircase as Candide, Martin, and the Abbé watched the people streaming out of the theatre after the performance. Although I'm very eager to see Lady Cunegonde again, said Candide, I'd still like to have supper with Mademoiselle Clairon, because she made a deep impression on me. The Abbé was not the kind of man who could call on Mademoiselle Clairon. She received only distinguished company. She's engaged this evening, he said, but allow me the honor of taking you to visit a lady of quality in whose house you'll come to know Paris as though you'd been here for 4 years. Candide, curious by nature, let the Abbé take him to the lady's house in the Faubourg Saint-Honoré. A faro game was in progress when they arrived. There were 12 gloomy players, each holding a little stack of cards, a dog-eared record of his misfortunes. Deep silence reigned. The players' faces were pale, the banker's was tense. The lady of the house was sitting beside this merciless banker, and her sharp eyes instantly spotted all the players who fraudulently dog-eared their cards. She made them unbend the corners with strict but polite attention, and never showed any anger for fear of losing her clients. She had given herself the title of Marquise de Parolignac. Her 15-year-old daughter sat at the table with the others, and warned her mother with a wink each time one of the poor players tried to repair the ravages of fortune by cheating. When the Abbé, Candide, and Martin walked in, no one stood up, greeted them, or even looked at them. Everyone was profoundly occupied with the cards. Baroness Thunder Tentrenc was more civil, said Candide. Meanwhile, the Abbé was saying something in the Marquise's ear. She stood up halfway, honored Candide with a gracious smile, and gave Martin a thoroughly dignified nod. She offered Candide a seat and a set of cards. He lost 50,000 francs in 2 draws, after which they all sat down to supper in good spirits. Everyone was surprised by Candide's lack of concern over his loss. The footmen said to each other, in their footman language, "He must be some English milord. He must be some English milord. He must be some English milord." The supper was like most Parisian suppers. Silence at first, then a burst of unintelligible chatter, then witticisms that were mostly vapid false rumors, bad reasonings, and the supper was like most Parisian suppers. Silence at first, then a burst of unintelligible chatter, then witticisms that were mostly vapid, false rumors, bad reasonings, a little politics, and a great deal of slander. They even spoke about new books. "Have you seen," said the Abbé, "the new novel written by Monsieur Gauchat, Doctor of Theology?" "Yes," replied one of the guests, "but I couldn't finish it. All kinds of senseless things have been written, but the writings of Monsieur Gauchat, Doctor of Theology, are the most senseless of all. I'm so disgusted with the enormous mass of abominable books with which we're flooded that I've taken to playing faro." "And what about Archdeacon T.'s essays?" said the Abbé. What do you think of them?" "Oh, what a deadly bore," said the Marquise de Parolignac. "What pains he takes to tell you things everyone already knows. How heavily he discusses things that aren't even worth being passed over lightly. How witlessly he takes over other people's wit. How he spoils everything he steals. How he disgusts me. But he won't disgust me any more. I've read a few of the Archdeacon's pages, and that's enough." Seated at the table was a man of learning and good taste, who confirmed what the Marquise had said. The conversation then turned to tragedies. The Marquise asked why there were tragedies which were sometimes performed but which were unreadable. The man of good taste explained quite clearly how a play could arouse some interest yet have no merit. He proved in a few words that it is not enough to bring in one or two of those situations which are found in novels and which always captivate an audience, but that a dramatist must be original without being eccentric, that he must be often sublime and always natural, that he must know the human heart and make it speak, be a great poet without letting any of his characters sound like a poet, have a perfect command of his language, and write it with purity and continuous harmony without ever sacrificing meaning to rhyme. A playwright who doesn't observe these rules, he added, may turn out one or two tragedies that will be applauded in the theater, but he'll never be regarded as a good writer. There are very few good tragedies. Some tragedies are actually idylls in well-written and well-rhymed dialogue. Some are political arguments that put you to sleep or long-winded dissertations that exasperate you. Others are wild ravings written in a barbarous style, filled with disconnected chatter, long declamations to the gods because the author doesn't know how to speak to men, false maxims, and bombastic commonplaces. Candide listened attentively to these remarks, and conceived a high opinion of the speaker. Since the Marquise had been careful to seat him beside her, he leaned close to her ear, and took the liberty of asking her who that man was who spoke so well. "He's a scholar," said the Marquise, "who never plays faro. The abbé occasionally brings him to my house for supper. He knows all about tragedies and books. He's written a tragedy that was hissed when it was performed, and a book that has never been seen outside his bookseller's shop, except for one inscribed copy which he sent to me." "What a great man," said Candide. "He's another Pangloss." Then turning toward him, he said, "Sir, am I right in assuming that you think everything is for the best in the physical and moral world, and that things could not have been otherwise?" "Sir, I think nothing of the sort," replied the scholar. "It seems to me that everything is going wrong in this country, that no one knows his rank or his responsibilities, and that except during supper, when people are in rather good spirits and seem to get along with each other fairly well, the rest of the time is spent in senseless quarrels. Jansenists against Molinists, Parliament against Church, men of letters against men of letters, courtiers against courtiers, financiers against the people, wives against husbands, relatives against relatives. It's an endless war." "I've seen worse," replied Candide, "but a wise man, who later had the misfortune to be hanged, taught me that such things are exactly as they should be. They're the shadows in a beautiful picture." "Your hanged philosopher was an arrogant jester," said Martin. "Your shadows are actually horrible blemishes." "The blemishes are made by men," said Candide. "They can't avoid making them." "Then it's not their fault," said Martin. Most of the gamblers, to whom this talk was unintelligible, were drinking. Martin began a discussion with the scholar while Candide recounted part of his adventures to the lady of the house. After supper, the Marquise took Candide into her boudoir and invited him to sit down on a couch. You're still madly in love with Lady Cunegonde of Thunder Ten Tronckh?" she said to him. "Yes, madam," replied Candide. "You answer me like a young man from Westphalia," said the Marquise, with a tender smile. "A Frenchman would have said to me, 'It's true that I once loved Cunegonde, but now that I've seen you, madame, I'm afraid I'm no longer in love with her.'" "I'm sorry, madam," said Candide. I'll answer you any way you like." "Your passion for her," said the Marquise, began when you picked up her handkerchief. I want you to pick up my garter." "I'll be glad to," said Candide, and he picked it up. "And now I want you to put it on me," said the lady, and Candide put it on her. "You see," she said, "you're a foreigner. I sometimes make my Parisian lovers languish for 2 weeks, but I'm giving myself to you the first night because a lady ought to do the honors of her country to a young man from Westphalia." Having noticed 2 enormous diamonds on the young foreigner's hand, she praised them so enthusiastically that they passed from his fingers to hers. After leaving the Marquise's house with the Abbé, Candide felt some remorse over having been unfaithful to Lady Cunegonde, and the Abbé shared his sorrow. He had received only a small part of the 50,000 francs Candide had lost at cards, and of the value of the 2 diamonds that had been half extorted from him. His plan was to draw as much profit as he could from any advantages his acquaintance with Candide might bring him. He talked to him a great deal about Cunegonde, and Candide told him he would beg her to forgive him when he saw her again in Venice. The Abbé redoubled his amiable attentions. He took an affectionate interest in everything Candide said, everything he did, everything he wanted to do. "So you're going to meet her in Venice?" he said. "Yes," replied Candide, "I absolutely must go and find Lady Cunegonde." Then, carried along by the pleasure of speaking about the object of his love, he related as he was wont to do, part of his advantage with that illustrious Westphalian lady. "Lady Cunegonde must be highly intelligent," said the Abbé, "and she must write charming letters." "I've never had a letter from her," said Candide. "After being driven from the castle because of my love for her, I naturally couldn't write to her. Then shortly afterward I learned that she was dead. Then I found her again. Then I lost her. And now I've sent a message to her 6,000 miles from here, and I'm waiting for an answer." The Abbé listened attentively, and seemed thoughtful. He soon took leave of the 2 foreigners, after giving them each an affectionate embrace. When Candide awoke the next morning, he received a letter worded as follows: "My dearest love, I have been ill in this city for a week now, and I have just learned that you are also here. I would fly to your arms if I could move. I was told about your voyage to Bordeaux. I left the faithful Cacambo and the old woman there, and I expect them to join me here soon. The governor of Buenos Aires took everything, but I still have your heart. Come to me. Your presence will either bring me back to life or make me die of pleasure." The charming and unexpected letter filled Candide with inexpressible joy, and the illness of his dear Cunegonde overwhelmed him with sorrow. Torn between these 2 sentiments, he took his gold and diamonds and went with Martin to the hotel where Lady Cunegonde was staying. He walked in trembling with emotion, his heart pounding, his voice choked by sobs. He tried to draw back the bed curtains and wanted to have some light brought in, but the maid said to him, "No, you mustn't. Light would kill her," and abruptly closed the curtains again. "My dearest Cunegonde," said Candide, weeping, "how do you feel? If you can't see me, at least speak to me." "She can't speak," said the maid. The lady then put out a plump hand from the bed. Candide bathed it with his tears for a long time, then filled it with diamonds, leaving a bag full of gold on the armchair. In the midst of his rapture, an officer of the watch came into the room, followed by the Abbé and a squad of soldiers. "Are these the 2 suspicious strangers?" he said. He immediately had them seized and ordered his men to take them to prison. "This isn't the way travelers are treated in El Dorado," said Candide. "I'm more of a Manichean than ever," said Martin. "But where are you taking us, sir?" said Candide. "To a dungeon," replied the officer. When he had regained his self-possession, Martin decided that the lady pretending to be Cunegonde was an impostor, that the Abbé was a scoundrel who had taken advantage of Candide's innocence as quickly as he could, and that the officer was another scoundrel who could easily be gotten rid of. Not wishing to expose himself to judicial proceedings enlightened by Martin's advice, and still impatient to see the real Cunegonde, Candide gave the officer 3 little diamonds worth about 30,000 francs each. "Ah, sir," said the man with the ivory stick, if you'd committed every crime imaginable, you'd still be the most honest man in the world. 3 diamonds, each one worth 30,000 francs. Sir, I'd rather die than take you to prison. All strangers are being arrested, but leave everything to me. I have a brother at Dieppe in Normandy. I'll take you there, and if you have a diamond to give him, he'll take care of you the same as I would." "But why are all strangers being arrested?" asked Candide. The abbé answered him, "Because a beggar from Artois heard some people talking nonsense, and that was enough to make him try to commit a parricide, not like the one of 1610 in May, but like the one of 1594 in December, and like several others that have been committed in other years and other months by other beggars who had heard people talking nonsense." The officer then explained what the abbé was referring to. "Oh, the monsters!" cried Candide. "What, can such horrors occur among people who sing and dance? I'm eager to get out of this country where monkeys harass tigers. I've seen bears in my country, but I've seen men only in El Dorado. In the name of God, sir, take me to Venice, where I must wait for Lady Cunegonde." "I can take you only to Lower Normandy," said the officer. He immediately had the irons removed, and he had said he had been mistaken, sent his men away, and took Candide and Martin to Dieppe, where he left them in the hands of his brother. There was a small Dutch ship in the harbor. Norman, who with the help of 3 diamonds had been made into the most obliging of men, embarked Candide and his retinue on this ship, which was about to sail for Portsmouth in England. It was not the way to Venice, but Candide felt that he had just been delivered from hell and expected to resume his journey to Venice at the first opportunity. Chapter 23. How Candide and Martin reached the coast of England, and what they saw there. "Oh, Pangloss, Pangloss! Oh, Martin, Martin! Oh, my dear Cunegonde, what kind of a world is this?" said Candide on the Dutch ship. "It's something insane and abominable," replied Martin. "You know England. Are people as mad there as in France?" "It's another kind of madness," said Martin. "As you know, those 2 nations are fighting a war over a few acres of snow on the edge of Canada, and they're spending more on that glorious war than the whole of Canada is worth. It's beyond my feeble powers to tell you whether there are more raving lunatics in one country than in another. All I know is that the people we're about to see are extremely moody and morose." Talking thus, they arrived at Portsmouth. The shore was covered with a large crowd of people. They were all looking attentively at a rather stout man who was kneeling blindfolded on the deck of a naval vessel. There were 4 soldiers standing opposite him. They each calmly fired 3 bullets into his head, and the crowd walked away with great satisfaction. "What was all that?" said Candide. "And what demon exercises his power everywhere?" He asked who the stout man was who had just been ceremoniously killed. "An admiral," was the reply. "And why was that admiral killed?" "Because he didn't kill enough men. He fought a battle with a French admiral, and it was decided that he wasn't close enough to him." "But," said Candide, "the French admiral was just as far away from the English admiral." "That's undeniable," was the answer. "But in this country it's good to kill an admiral now and then to encourage the others." Candide was so bewildered and shocked by what he had seen and heard that he would not even set foot on shore. He made a bargain with the Dutch captain, even at the risk of being robbed by him as he had been robbed by the captain from Suriname, to take him to Venice without delay. The captain was ready 2 days later. They sailed along the coast of France. They passed within sight of Lisbon, and Candide shuddered. They sailed through the straits and into the Mediterranean. Finally, they landed at Venice. "God be praised," said Candide, embracing Martin. "This is where I'll see the fair Cunegonde again. I trust Cacambo as I would myself. All is well. Everything is going well. Things are going as well as they possibly can." Chapter 24. Paquette and Brother Giroffle. As soon as he was in Venice, he looked for Cacambo in all the inns and cafes, and asked all the women of easy virtue about him, but he did not find him. Every day he sent messengers to all incoming ships and boats. No news of Cacambo. How can this be? He said to Martin. I've had time to go from Suriname to Bordeaux, from Bordeaux to Paris, from Paris to Dieppe, and from Dieppe to Portsmouth, then sail down the coast of Spain and Portugal, cross the Mediterranean, and spend several months in Venice, and still the fair Cunegonde hasn't come. Instead of her, I've met only an infamous wench and an abbé from Perigord. Cunegonde must be dead, and the only thing left for me is to die too. Oh, it would have been better to stay in the paradise of El Dorado again instead of coming back to this devilish Europe. How right you are, my dear Martin. Life is nothing but illusions and calamities. He sank into black melancholy and would have nothing to do with the opera a la moda or the other amusements of the carnival. Not one lady made him feel the slightest temptation. You certainly are naive, said Martin. To imagine that a half-breed valet with 5 or 6 million in his pocket will go to find your mistress at the end of the world and bring her to you here in Venice. If he finds her, he'll take her for himself. If he doesn't, he'll take another woman. I advise you to forget about your valet Cacambo and your mistress Cunegonde. Martin was not very comforting. Candide's melancholy increased, and Martin was constantly proving to him that there was little virtue or happiness in the world, except perhaps in El Dorado, where no one could go. One day, as he was discussing this important question and waiting for Cunegonde, Candide saw a young Theatine monk in St. Mark's Square, arm in arm with a girl. The monk appeared to be healthy, plump, and vigorous. He had bright eyes and an air of self-assurance, a firm countenance, and a proud bearing. The girl was very pretty. She sang as she walked with her monk, gazed at him amorously, and pinched his chubby cheeks from time to time. You'll at least admit that those two are happy, said Candide to Martin. Till now I've met nothing but unfortunate people in all the inhabitable world, except in El Dorado, but I'll bet that girl and that monk are very happy. I'll bet they're not, said Martin. All we have to do is to invite them to dinner, said Candide, and you'll see if I'm wrong. He immediately went up to them, paid his respects to them, and invited them to his inn to eat macaroni, Lombardy, partridges, and caviar, with lacrima, Christie, and wines from Montepulciano, Cyprus, and Samos. The young lady blushed, the monk accepted the offer, and she followed him. Looking at Candide in surprise and embarrassment, her eyes dimmed by a few tears. As soon as she entered his bedroom, she said to him, What, don't you recognize Paquette, Master Candide? At these words, Candide, who had not looked at her attentively till then, because he was still preoccupied with Cunegonde, said to her, Alas, poor child, so you're the one who put Dr. Pangloss in such fine condition? Alas, poor child, so you're the one who put Dr. Pangloss in such fine condition. Alas, sir, it's true, said Paquette. I see you know all about it. I've heard of the terrible things that happened to the Baroness's whole household, including the fair Cunegonde, and I swear my fate has been just as sad. I was completely innocent when you first saw me. A Franciscan friar who was my confessor easily seduced me, and the results were horrible. I was forced to leave the castle a short time after the Baron had driven you away, with hard kicks in the behind. If a famous doctor hadn't taken pity on me, I'd have died. I became his mistress for a while out of gratitude. His wife was violently jealous, and she beat me unmercifully every day. She was a fury. The doctor was the ugliest man in the world, and I was the most miserable creature alive, from being constantly beaten for a man I didn't love. You know, sir, how dangerous it is for a shrewish woman to be a doctor's wife. One day, exasperated by her behavior, he gave her some medicine for a slight cold, and it worked so well that she died 2 hours later in horrible convulsions. Her family tried to have him arrested for murder, but he ran away and I was put in prison. My innocence would have saved me if I hadn't been rather pretty. The judge released me on condition that I let him take the doctor's place. I was soon supplanted by a rival, driven away without any compensation, and forced to continue that abominable trade which seems so pleasant to you men, but which is nothing but an abyss of misery for us. I came to Venice to practice my profession. Oh, sir, if you could only imagine what it's like to be forced to caress without discrimination an old merchant, a lawyer, a monk, a gondolier, or a priest, to be exposed to every kind of insult and abuse, to be often reduced to borrowing a skirt for some disgusting man to lift up, to be robbed by one man of what you've earned with another, to be blackmailed by magistrates, and to have nothing to look forward to except an atrocious old age, the workhouse, and the garbage dump. You'd conclude that I'm one of the most wretched creatures in the world. It was thus that Paquette opened her heart to the kindly Candide as they sat in a small private room with Martin. You see, I've already won half the bet, said Martin to Candide. Brother Giroffle had remained in the dining room and was having a drink while he waited for dinner. But you looked so gay and happy when I met you, Candide. But you looked so gay and happy when I met you, said Candide. Candide said to Paquette. You were singing and caressing your monk with such natural affection. You seemed as happy then as you now claim to be unfortunate. Oh, sir, replied Paquette, that's one more misery of my profession. Yesterday I was robbed and beaten by an officer, and today I must appear to be in a cheerful mood to please the monk. Candide had heard enough. He admitted that Martin was right. They sat down to table with Paquette and the monk. The meal was rather enjoyable, and by the end of it they were talking to one another with a certain intimacy. Father, Candide said to the monk, you seem to be leading a life that anyone would envy. You're obviously in the pink of health, your face is aglow with happiness, you have a pretty girl for your recreation, and you appear to be quite content with your lot as a Theatine monk. Believe me, sir, said Brother Giroffle, I wish the Theatines were all at the bottom of the sea. I've been tempted 100 times to set fire to the monastery and go off and become a Turk. My parents forced me to put on this hateful robe at the age of 15, so that they could leave a larger fortune to my cursed elder brother. May the devil take him. The monastery is filled with jealousy, discord, and anger. It's true that I've preached a few bad sermons that have brought me a little money. The prior steals half of it, and I spend the rest on women. But each time I go back to the monastery at night, I'm ready to smash my head against the wall of the dormitory, and all the other monks feel the same. Martin turned to Candide with his usual composure and said, haven't I won the whole bet? Candide gave Paquette 2,000 piastres and Brother Giroffle 1,000. I assure you they'll be happy with that, he said. I'm sure they won't, said Martin. It may be that those piastres will make them unhappier than before. Perhaps so, said Candide, but one thing consoles me. I've learned that we often come across people we thought we'd never see again. Since I've found my red sheep and Paquette, it's quite possible that I'll also find Cunegonde. I hope she'll make you happy some day, said Martin, but I strongly doubt it. You're a bitter man, said Candide. That's because I've lived, said Martin. But look at those gondoliers. They're always singing, said Candide. You don't see them at home with their wives and their little brats, said Martin. The Doge has his troubles, and gondoliers have theirs. It's true that, on the whole, a gondolier's life is preferable to a Doge's, but I think the difference is so small that it's not worth examining. I've been told about a senator named Pococurante, said Candide, who lives in a beautiful palace on the Brenta, and always gives strangers a courteous welcome. They say he's a man who's never known sorrow or trouble. I'd like to see such a rare specimen, said Martin. Candide immediately sent Signor Pococurante a request for permission to visit him the following day.